Hey, so I just wrote, let's go back for a second. I am in I have completed my second session of trauma therapy. Um, I was doing cognitive behavioral therapy last year. This year I'm doing trauma therapy. It's a different form of therapy. I have 17 sessions. I'm very grateful to have these sessions. It is very difficult to gain access to therapeutic services. They are very expensive and difficult to come by, so I'm taking it very seriously. Um, and so I wrote an email to my mom because she is also dealing with a loss, and she shared with me that she is having her own mental health struggles dealing with trauma and loss because we share a similar loss but have a different experience with it. So we both lost a relationship with a person who was very close to us, and we just have a different relationship with that person, so we're processing that loss differently. um so as I was writing the email to her, trying to explain how I'm dealing with trauma therapy or how I'm engaging with trauma therapy for the first time, I realized that I have all of these resources. And as I'm talking and writing more about the feelings wheel, I want to make this information more accessible. So the way that I'm going to do that is basically by reading out articles, because although the article is written online, I have said this before, some people have just um, a really low reading level, and so the articles are still inaccessible even though they're in the written format. Um, so this is from the BetterHelp website. Um, it's one of their articles, What It Means to Struggle with Psychological Trauma and What You Can Do About It, written by Darby Fabian. He's a medically reviewed by Kelly L. Burns. Psychological trauma can happen in some of the most extreme situations. While everyone lives through an unpleasant experience now and then, only some people are unfortunate enough to experience true emotional trauma. To understand trauma, you need to not only look at the definition of it, but also delve into a deeper meaning of how psychological trauma alters a life. Then you can get help for yourself or a loved one if you know has faced a traumatic experience. In the United States, 61% of men and 51% of women report being exposed to at least one traumatic event in their lifetime. If trauma goes unaddressed, it may lead to mental illness and failing physical health. However, among those who seek help for psychological trauma, approximately 72% learn to cope with the traumatic events and live a life free of long-term negative effects. What is psychological trauma? When it comes to psychological trauma, it seems everyone is an amateur psychologist. That is so true. Everyone believes that they know what psychological trauma is and how to diagnose it, right? People who don't know what trauma is may point at common experiences and proclaim they have scarred someone for life or have been scarred by someone. They very well might have, but trauma is not an award that should be used lightly or as a blanket term for something unpleasant that happened. However, psychological emotional trauma has a very precise definition. What it is that separates psychological trauma from the merely unpleasant. Types of events and situations that may cause emotional trauma. Traumatic events are defined as events that are powerfully upsetting. These events produce effects that intrude upon someone's daily life, creating a major threat to a person's psychological and or physical well-being. A traumatic event may be the result of another person's actions, or it could be caused by an accident. Either way, the effects are very similar. Some examples of traumatic events include natural disasters such as fires and earthquakes, tornadoes, or hurricanes, physical or sexual assault, exposure to acts of war and or terrorism, involvement in a car accident or workplace accident event, domestic violence, the unexpected death of a loved one, especially if it's related to an accident. How do I know if I have experienced trauma? Many people experience strong physical or emotional reactions following a traumatic event. In many cases, the feeling of uneasiness will diminish over time once the threat has been eliminated. However, depending on the severity of the event, some symptoms of psychological trauma may get worse or last for longer periods of time. Some of the most common symptoms associated with psychological trauma include nightmares, confusion, mood swings, intrusive thoughts about the event, flashbacks of the event, social isolation, easily startled, appearing or feeling anxious, sexual dysfunction, guilt. Unfortunately, the effects of psychological trauma can linger for years, especially without intervention. In fact, trauma can affect every aspect of life. Some of the most common effects of untreated trauma include substance abuse, social withdrawal, hostility, depression, compulsive behavior, sexual promiscuity. Untreated psychological trauma may eventually lead to mental illness, including an anxiety disorder, depression, or phobias. That's why it's extremely important to seek treatment if you've experienced trauma. Recovering from psychological trauma. Not everyone who experiences a traumatic event is scarred. However, recovery does require dealing with the painful emotions by taking time to process them. If the person who has been traumatized does not deal with the feelings of distress, they tend to replay the event over and over again in their mind, which can lead to long-term stress. There are 4 essential steps to addressing and overcoming psychological trauma. Learning these steps can give you a sense of control over the situation. Stage 1, circuit breaking. Much like an electrical system, the human nervous system can be overstimulated. This is often what happens when a traumatic event takes place. As a natural response, the body tends to shut down or function only at a basic level. Some people feel like they're in shock or numb at this stage, and others report feeling emotionally and spiritually disconnected. Stage 2, return of feelings. Once the initial shock wears off, normal feelings and emotions begin to return. During this time, it may seem like the affected person constantly talks about the event. Some may write in journals or even draw to process the situation. This is a way of releasing the feelings of being overwhelmed so they can begin to heal. Stage 3, constructive action. Taking action steps to give individuals a sense of control, which is important after experiencing a traumatic event. The sense of powerlessness that many experience after trauma can feel crippling. For some, even the simplest act, such as sending cards to people, visiting hospitals, or cooking a meal for someone, can help them return to normal. Anything that gives one a sense of purpose can promote healing from a psychological trauma. Stage 4, reintegration. When someone experiences psychological trauma, one of the best ways to experience healing and become stronger is to become involved with others. Being willing to talk to others who may be experiencing a similar situation is one way to release the frustration and pain of a traumatic event. During this stage of healing, many people express a renewed commitment to goals and a deeper connection to others. When you need help for emotional trauma. Many people who experience psychological trauma are afraid to reach out for help. However, it can be difficult to manage the symptoms of trauma without professional intervention. If you've experienced psychological trauma, you're not alone, and help is available. Experienced counselors and therapists can provide a safe space where you can talk about traumatic events. They can also teach you coping mechanisms to help you deal with the trauma so that long-term negative effects will be reduced or eliminated. 373 studies exploring the efficacy of online therapy for a range of conditions such as anxiety, depression, trauma and PTSD, mood disorders, phobias, and many others found internet-based cognitive behavioral therapy to be just as effective as in-person therapy. These studies also found that internet-based therapy can be more beneficial to some, as it helps remove some of the barriers in place with traditional therapy, cost effectiveness, convenience, and ability to attend sessions, and social anxieties. Many people who have experienced trauma find it difficult to open up to a counselor face to face. This is where online counseling comes in. BetterHelp offers completely anonymous online counseling with a licensed professional, so you can meet with someone from the comfort of your own home or anywhere you have an internet connection. Research shows that online therapy can play a powerful role in recovering from trauma and tends to be cheaper than traditional therapy. BetterHelp's mission is to provide help to anyone who's struggling with life events when and where you need it. Their network of licensed counselors offers support for hundreds of issues, including trauma. Read below for some reviews of BetterHelp's counselors from people experiencing similar issues.